The Alang breaking and scrap yards are the largest of their kind. This is where the floating cities we call cruise ships are dismantled and lost forever. Hundreds of ships are run aground here in tight configuration to be dismantled through back-breaking work. Cruise ships, oil tankers, container ships, and even some naval warships have met their fate in this almost apocalyptic-looking landscape. And although it's interesting to see, it hasn't been without extreme environmental or humanitarian concerns. Today we discover the Alang Breakers. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Modern ships are so large that it's difficult to comprehend how relatively short their lifespans are in comparison. Hence, once fully exploited commercially, they become big liabilities, literally. You see, even though the active lifespan of cargo ships is only between 20 and 30 years, they've worked hard in that time frame, and once they're used up, so to say, it's not economical to continue repair work. Historically, scrapping them mainly had been done in Europe and North America. However, by the 1970s, a long list of circumstances began weighing down the breaking industries. High labor costs, worker safety, compensation for injuries, and environmental protection became mounting concerns. In simple terms, the cost of labor and the work environment was so gratuitous that it offset the ship's value as scrap metal. So operations were temporarily moved to Pacific countries such as Korea and Taiwan. However, as these economies developed, ship scrapping was forced out once again. Then, after a brief transition period, Alang, India became the chosen site for the future breaking of the world's biggest ships. Ships were first grounded there in 1983. But why? Why was this location chosen? Well, labor in this part of India is relatively cheap. The work requires minimal skill in engineering and simple mechanic experience. And importantly, the cost to adhere to India's comparatively loose labor laws no longer offset the value of the scrap metal. There was also a geographic advantage to the new location, since the local beach has an incredibly high tide. It's easy for ships to be beached for their scrapping. And the process of how they are brought ashore is quite interesting, as massive industrial winches are used to pull them out of the waterline. From there, workers eventually anchor them to the ground wherever necessary. Before the work starts, sailors typically remove their personal effects. The boats are then beached, and everything of value is stripped and sold. Objects such as bedding, chairs, desks, onboard computers, and TVs will all likely be left on board and sold to local merchants. But other items are also stripped and potentially put on the market, including copper wiring, portholes, and second-hand lifeboats or other safety equipment. Sometimes the ship's entire turbine engine is recovered and sold off at high value to be used as small industrial power plants. These generators often sell for approximately 15% of their original retail price after refurbishment. Occasionally, workers find liquor or narcotics, apparently keeping them for private consumption. Although the scrapping process is hazardous, draining the ship's fuel bunker is particularly tricky. There's no single method of doing this. Instead, a crew of inspectors decides on the course of action for the scrapping on a case-by-case basis. From the inside, ships are torn apart with welding tools, crowbars, sledgehammers, and raw elbow grease. From the outside, chains are sometimes used to pull the vessel apart and onto the beach, where welders cut and continue the process with personal tools. Apparently, small container ships can be dismantled over the course of a couple of weeks or maybe months, with larger ships sometimes taking years. There's a significant degree of nuance in selecting ships to resell. The weight of the ship in raw tonnage isn't necessarily enough justification alone. Also considered are the age and point of origin, matters that are especially critical when it comes to the breaking down of military ships. Russian-built ships were seen as an almost total loss by the breakers as far back as 2002, with cheap steel and fabrication standards that make them very difficult to sell and mainly to export. So it's a bit ironic to consider where the Indian Navy bought its aircraft carrier from. Anyhow, American ships are considered to be the highest in value for their steel production quality, but are balanced by the extreme price to buy them even after retirement. Then there's Japanese ships, which are seen as the most profitable, the easiest and fastest to break up and resell. One ship to be dismantled here was the French aircraft carrier Clemenceau. She was decommissioned on October 1st, 1997, but sat around for years, unwanted by any nation or navy, not even for scrap value. This ship was designed in the 50s and was dangerously toxic because of asbestos in the hull and deck spaces. Alang was the only breaking yard willing to take the doomed vessel. This was far from uncommon, but it illustrates something unique about the Alang breakers that haven't been mentioned yet. Alang is willing to deconstruct ships of almost any genre, regardless of safety or health risks. Vessels containing lead paint and asbestos are in some ways the least of the workers' and locals' concerns, given that the yards in general are recognized as toxic waste dumps for materials of almost any degree. The UN's environmental program has targeted the shipbreaking industry since 1992, with Alang being no exception. It's perhaps the worst violator of them all. As mentioned moments ago, ships that no one else will take for being too toxic to safely and economically handle are frequently brought to the Alang beaches, where the toxic materials within the ship are released into the air, sea, and ground. Even though in theory, carcinogens are meant to be stripped away and dealt with before export to scrapyards, traces remain, and other hazardous materials can be burned without a second thought because they are non-recyclable. This has had damning effects on the surrounding lands as well, especially the bentonite clay soils close to the yard. You see, bentonite clay bonds quickly and was once common in binding industrial asbestos. As you can imagine, it holds the fallen pollutants more naturally. This has led to the soil's decreasing fertility rates and increasing salinity, slowly destroying any natural wildlife or agricultural potential. Of course, the problem in the water is even worse. A 1998 Greenpeace report, which I should inform you is both long and outdated, found heavy metals in the marine soil, polluting the waters for both humans and marine life. The low availability of drinking water painfully emphasizes this issue. So despite the area's population boom, only a few wells are drilled for public water. The existing ones are reportedly improperly sealed, so water contamination from industrial components is very likely. The water availability is so challenging that the port authorities have to bring it in on tanker ships, anchoring them in place just so that a water source is within reach. The effects on the ecosystem are challenging, with no empirical baseline existing before the shipbreakers began operations. However, authorities and local migratory workers noticed the impact on flora. Housing has expanded widely in the area, and it's common for houses to make their power for heating and cooking through the collection of fuel wood, meaning forest devastation and smog has also been added to this region's complexity. Other side effects on flora are the presence of random seeds and weeds that are found in the fated ships. Although it might sound strange, many weeds are so detrimental that they're found growing inside and on top of ships at sea. The breaker yard is no exception. Workers must stay vigilant for weeds and other dangerous plant life, which are a frequent source of skin irritation. Other invasive species found in the ships, such as plants found in crew cabins, have to be destroyed. A study of local water birds also found similar results. Before the yards were built, the population of birds in the area included as many as 30 species, and in the vicinity of the scrapyard is the lowest number, with only 6 distinct species consistently seen across a year-long survey. This is likely because of the spill-off of oil and other heavy metals and liquid pollutants impacting the food chain and breeding grounds. Of course, those who could be harmed even more by the shipyards are the workers themselves. There are 12 categories, ranging from skilled welders, crane operators, heavy winch operators, to simple common laborers, helpers of other capacities, and migrant workers. Perhaps the people in the most difficult situation are those who serve as so-called pack mules, moving stripped steel from one place to another. These workers are almost entirely poor migrants with limited skills and education, qualifiers that are rather commonplace here, with the only exceptions typically being foremen and supervisors who are locals but with a higher skill level as they had many years on the job. Some of the migrant workers are actual foreigners, but most of them are Indian, just from poorer states within the country. About 3/4 of the workers live in nearby shanty towns, and for them, as mentioned earlier, there needs to be more potable water. There's also limited access to electricity or sewage and drainage systems for sanitation, so conditions are pretty challenging. I don't really think the pay makes up for these conditions, as unskilled workers' starting wages is a measly $50 a month. Plot supervisors and experienced workers can earn a better but still appalling $65 to $200 a month. However, while anyone in North America or Europe would see these rates as awful, they are above local standards, even considering the constant exposure to toxic materials and high risk of death on the job. For many, it's a means to an end, but it comes at a huge price. Without even considering the ever-present threat of a giant slab of steel falling on their heads, workers at the shipbreakers frequently contract illnesses such as diarrhea, jaundice, and stomach illnesses caused by a lack of sanitation and poor food. More severe diseases can even include cancer, skin diseases, and tuberculosis. There's also a high rate of prostitution and unsafe sex caused by the predominantly male workforce being away from their wives and family, with perhaps predictable results. According to the regional and national law, workers' health and safety are among their primary concerns. When researched by the UN, the paper simply concluded that, quote, safety measures required by the Factories Act are not being implemented. The industry is scattered, disorganized, and puts little value on human life. So far, this has been a disconcertingly negative topic, so we should try to see the other side of the coin. While the average literacy and skill level of workers and migrants is dismal, the proportional wealth families in the area can earn means that a large number of local kids from working families have a much higher chance of attending school than they would have without the breaking yards. Before closing out, let's include some final caveats. There are limited English written reports on the breakers. The source we used for this topic was predominantly by UNESCO, and while I consider the findings of the report valid, as the research was conducted over 2 years using local and international resources, it was released almost 20 years ago. And while this is far from ideal, the more modern research conducted in India was restricted and isolated within the country. So it's possible that the regional and national authorities would like to keep things that way, meaning that you and I will never really know the full story. So I suppose I'll let you be the jury on this one by sharing your opinion in the comments section. But before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And until next time, this is Ryan Socash signing off.